I'm Emma, and if you're watching this, I need you to know something about me right away. I used to believe that family was unbreakable, no matter what storms came our way. For 29 years, I lived by that belief, clinging to the idea that my mom's love was unconditional, that even if we fought, even if I made mistakes, she would always be there to catch me when I fell. But life has a cruel way of testing the things you think are certain. And in my case, that test came the day my mom turned her back on me in the harshest way possible. I can still feel the sting of her words, the way she looked at me as if I was a stranger she could no longer trust. Lies, ugly, venomous lies, had twisted everything between us. And instead of asking me the truth, instead of standing by me, she believed them. That night, with my belongings shoved into garbage bags and my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces, I was kicked out of the only home I'd ever known. I wish I could tell you I walked away strong, that I had a plan. But the truth? I felt shattered, abandoned, and completely lost. My mom's betrayal wasn't just about losing a roof over my head, it was like losing a part of myself, and I couldn't understand how everything had collapsed so fast. What I didn't know, what none of us knew at that moment, was that the same lies that destroyed me were also quietly unraveling my mom's marriage. And just weeks later, everything she thought she had built for herself came crashing down. The irony, the pain, the unexpected twist. It's a story I never imagined I'd live to tell. Before I dive deeper into this story, let me set the stage. My name is Emma. I'm 29, and for most of my life, I tried to be the perfect daughter. Not perfect in the sense of flawless, I made mistakes like anyone else, but I always tried to show up, to be reliable, to make my mom proud. She raised me mostly on her own after her divorce, and I admired her strength more than anything. She was my role model, the person I wanted to grow up to be like. But sometimes the people you put on a pedestal are the very ones who let you fall the hardest. My mom had remarried a few years back, and for a while, things seemed stable, even happy. Her husband, Mark, was polite enough, though I never felt a real connection with him. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I just wasn't used to sharing her attention. What I didn't realize was that behind his calm demeanor, there was a storm brewing, one that would drag all of us into its path. The night she kicked me out was the breaking point of something much larger, something I couldn't see clearly yet. All I knew was the pain of being accused of things I didn't do, the humiliation of being thrown away by my own mother, and the fear of not knowing where to go next. But looking back, that night wasn't just the end of one chapter. It was the start of a revelation that would change everything for both of us. And that's exactly why I need you here with me. Because this isn't just my story. It's about trust, betrayal, and the shocking ways lies can tear families apart. So stay until the end, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because you won't want to miss what happens next. I grew up believing that my mom and I were a team. It had always been us against the world, her fierce independence paired with my unwavering loyalty. When I was little, she worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads, and even when she came home exhausted, she still made time to sit with me, talk about my day, or watch a silly show together. Those moments shaped me. I learned resilience from her, the kind that whispers, "You'll survive this, even in the hardest moments." And that's why what happened later was so unthinkable. Because when the person you trust most becomes the one to push you away, the world stops making sense. When she married Mark, I tried to be supportive. She deserved happiness after years of being alone. I remember their wedding day, how radiant she looked in a simple cream dress, her smile brighter than I'd seen in years. Everyone told me, "You should be happy for her." And I was, or at least I wanted to be. But from the beginning, something about Mark unsettled me. He was polite, yes, and generous in public, but there was a coldness in his eyes when no one else was watching. I dismissed it at first, thinking maybe it was just me being protective of my mom. I told myself I'd get used to him. The first cracks showed in small ways. Mark would make little comments about me overstaying my welcome in the house, even though I was working, paying part of the bills, and contributing like any adult would. He'd joke that I was the third wheel, and while my mom laughed nervously, I noticed how his words stuck to her, planting seeds of doubt. I'd catch her glancing at me afterward, as if silently questioning whether maybe Mark was right. It was subtle, but it was there. Then came the lies, though at the time, I didn't know they were lies. Mark started suggesting to my mom that I was irresponsible with money, that I was talking behind her back, that I was secretly trying to sabotage their marriage. None of it was true, but he was clever. He never accused me directly. Instead, he'd drop comments like, "You know, Emma doesn't seem happy for us," or "I think she resents our marriage." Over time, I watched my mom's trust in me erode, grain by grain, like sand slipping through her fingers. At first, I tried to ignore it. I thought my bond with my mom was too strong to be shaken by rumors. I thought she knew me better than that. But the more Mark whispered, the more distant she became. She started questioning me about where I was going, who I was with, how I spent my money. Conversations that used to feel warm and easy suddenly felt like interrogations. And no matter how much I explained, it never seemed enough. The person who once believed in me without hesitation was slowly slipping away, and I couldn't understand why. Things reached a boiling point one night when Mark accused me of stealing money from his wallet. I was stunned, furious, humiliated. I had never stolen from anyone in my life, let alone from someone living under the same roof. My mom stood there silently as he laid out his accusation, and I kept waiting for her to defend me, to say, "That's ridiculous. Emma would never do that." But she didn't. Instead, she just looked at me with this pained expression, as if she couldn't decide who to believe. My heart sank that night. It wasn't just the accusation. It was the realization that my mom's faith in me was slipping away. I tried to confront her afterward. I told her how unfair it was, how Mark was manipulating her, how none of what he said was true. She listened, but her eyes were distant, clouded with doubt. "Emma," she whispered, "I don't know what to think anymore." That sentence pierced deeper than anything else she could have said. For the first time, I felt like I was losing her, not to distance or to time, but to someone else's lies. And I didn't know how to fight against something so invisible, yet so powerful. The tension in the house grew unbearable. Meals were silent, conversations turned sharp, and even the smallest misunderstandings exploded into arguments. Mark thrived in that chaos. I could see it in the way he smirked whenever my mom and I fought, the satisfaction in his eyes when I stormed off to my room in tears. He was winning, and I was powerless to stop it. I tried to spend more time outside the house, thinking that maybe space would cool things down. But every time I came back, the atmosphere felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in. And then came the night that changed everything. It started with another argument, this time over something ridiculous. Mark claimed I had been disrespectful to him in front of his friends. I hadn't. All I did was answer a question honestly, but he twisted it into something ugly. My mom sided with him, and before I knew it, voices were raised, doors slammed, and my mom looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You need to leave, Emma. Tonight." I stood there frozen, thinking I had misheard her. "Leave? As in pack my things and go?" She repeated it, louder this time, and the finality in her tone shattered me. She grabbed garbage bags from the kitchen and started stuffing my clothes into them, tears streaming down her face. I begged her to stop, begged her to listen, begged her to remember who I really was. But the more I pleaded, the more resolute she became. And as Mark stood in the corner, watching with that same smug expression, I realized he had won. My own mother, the person I trusted most, was casting me out. I left that night with my life crammed into trash bags, my heart hollow, and my world upside down. Standing on the porch, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to, I felt like I had lost everything. But what I didn't realize in that moment was that this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a storm that would soon turn against my mom in ways neither of us could have imagined. The first night after I was kicked out is burned into my memory. I didn't have a plan, didn't have a backup place waiting for me. I sat in my car with those trash bags piled in the back seat, staring at the steering wheel as if it could tell me what to do next. The silence was unbearable, pierced only by the sound of my own shaky breathing. I considered calling my mom, begging her one last time to change her mind, but pride and pain kept me from dialing. Instead, I drove aimlessly until I found myself parked in a grocery store lot, where I cried until exhaustion forced me into a restless sleep. That night, I felt invisible, discarded, like I no longer existed in the world I had always known. The following days blurred together in a haze of desperation. I crashed on a friend's couch for a while, trying not to overstay my welcome. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of her kids getting ready for school, and I'd force a smile, pretending I was fine. At night, when everyone was asleep, I'd lie awake thinking about my mom, about the emptiness of her kitchen without my laughter, the silence of her living room without our conversations. I wondered if she thought about me at all, if she regretted what she'd done. The ache of missing her was like a constant weight pressing down on my chest, suffocating and relentless. Eventually, I managed to pick up extra shifts at work, just enough to rent a tiny room in a shared apartment. It wasn't much. Peeling paint on the walls, a mattress that creaked with every movement. But it was mine. I tried to convince myself this was a fresh start, that I could rebuild from here. But the truth was, I still felt like a ghost of myself. The betrayal had cut too deep. Every time I unpacked my clothes, I was reminded of the way my mom had stuffed them into garbage bags, as if I were nothing more than clutter to be cleared away. What kept me going were the people who showed up when I least expected it. My best friend, Sarah, called me every day, sometimes just to sit in silence with me over the phone. My coworker, Daniel, invited me to join him and his wife for dinner, reminding me what it felt like to be welcomed without judgment. Those small gestures were lifelines, pulling me back from the edge of despair. They reminded me that family isn't always blood. It's the people who choose to stand by you when everyone else turns away. Still, even with their support, I couldn't silence the voice in my head that whispered, "Why didn't she believe you?" I replayed every moment, every conversation with my mom, searching for answers. Was I blind to her doubts? Did I miss the signs that she was slipping away? Or had Mark truly poisoned her so thoroughly that she couldn't see me anymore? The questions haunted me, eating away at my self-worth. I had always believed my mom knew me better than anyone. But now, I wasn't so sure. Weeks passed, and though the pain dulled slightly, the anger simmered beneath the surface. That's when I started hearing rumors. Subtle at first, then louder, impossible to ignore. A mutual friend mentioned seeing my mom crying alone in her car outside a cafe. Another hinted that Mark had been spending a lot of time with a female coworker, more than what seemed appropriate. At first, I brushed it off, thinking people were just gossiping. But as the stories piled up, a picture began to form, one that made my stomach twist with both dread and bitter vindication. I couldn't help but feel the cruel irony. The same man who had accused me of betrayal was apparently betraying her. The same lies he told to push me out were now circling back to her in a different, sharper form. I wanted to feel pity, but the truth is, I felt conflicted. Part of me ached for her. She was my mother, and despite everything, I still loved her. But another part of me thought, this is what happens when you put your faith in the wrong person. It was a dangerous mix of sorrow and grim satisfaction, and it tore me apart inside. One evening, Sarah came over to my room with takeout and said softly, "Emma, you need to know something. Mark's been seen at bars with other women. People are talking." Her eyes searched mine, waiting for my reaction. I froze, unsure whether to laugh at the hypocrisy or cry at the realization that my mom was living the very betrayal she had once accused me of. The food in front of me went cold as my mind raced. How long had this been going on? Did she know? Did she still believe in him the way she once refused to believe in me? I thought about calling her, about warning her, about saying, "Mom, do you see now? Do you finally understand?" But my pride stopped me again. After everything she had put me through, I couldn't be the one to reach out. Not yet. Still, deep down, I knew this story wasn't over. Because if the rumors were true, if Mark's mask was finally slipping, then the storm that had once destroyed me was now heading straight for her, and the fallout would be far worse than anything she had imagined. The weeks that followed were like living in two worlds at once. In one world, I was rebuilding piece by piece, working extra hours, paying my rent, and trying to stitch together some sense of normalcy. In the other, I was haunted by every new piece of information I heard about my mom and Mark. It was as if the universe wanted to make sure I knew their perfect marriage was crumbling. Each rumor cut into me differently. Some made me ache with sadness for her. Others filled me with a dark satisfaction, a quiet voice whispering, "Now she knows how it feels." Balancing those feelings was exhausting, and I often found myself crying without even knowing why. Then came the night Sarah showed me undeniable proof. She had been at a restaurant downtown when she spotted Mark with a woman who clearly wasn't my mom. They weren't just talking. They were leaning into each other, laughing in a way that felt intimate, hands brushing across the table. Sarah, knowing I wouldn't believe it without seeing, snapped a photo from across the room. When she slid her phone across the table to me, I stared at the image, my stomach turning. There he was, the man who had turned my life upside down, exposed in the very betrayal he once accused me of. The irony was almost too much to bear. That photo became a weight in my pocket. I saved it, looked at it, deleted it, then restored it again. I didn't know what to do with it. Part of me wanted to send it to my mom immediately, to shatter the illusion she was still clinging to. Another part of me hesitated, wondering if she would even believe me. After all, she hadn't believed me before. What if she dismissed it again, said it was just a misunderstanding, or worse, accused me of fabricating it to drive a wedge between them? That fear kept me silent longer than I'd like to admit. Meanwhile, my mom's silence toward me remained deafening. Weeks had passed, yet she hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't even asked where I was staying. I checked my phone constantly, hoping for her name to appear on the screen, but it never did. The only updates I had about her life came through others, whispered in hushed tones, as if people were afraid I might break under the weight of the truth, and maybe I already was. Each piece of gossip reminded me that, despite everything, she was still my mom, and watching her life unravel from a distance was agonizing. It was Daniel who finally said what I couldn't admit aloud. Over coffee one morning, he leaned across the table and said, "Emma, you know she's going to need you when this all comes crashing down." His words hit me like a thunderbolt. I had spent so much time stewing in my own hurt that I hadn't considered what might happen when she finally saw Mark for who he really was. Would I be ready to face her? Could I put aside my own pain to be there for her, the way she hadn't been there for me? I didn't have an answer. A few days later, the inevitable happened. My aunt called me out of the blue, her voice low and urgent. "Emma, I think you should know, your mom and Mark are fighting. It's bad. He didn't come home last night." I felt a strange mix of shock and relief, as if the truth I'd been waiting for had finally arrived. My aunt went on, saying she had seen my mom crying at her house, saying things weren't working, that she didn't know what to do. I hung up the phone and just sat there, staring at the wall, my emotions colliding all at once. She was finally living the betrayal I had been accused of. The next few days, the news spread fast among family and friends. Mark had been caught cheating, openly this time, no room for denial. People were furious, some even reaching out to me to apologize for how they had doubted me before. "We should have believed you," one cousin admitted, her voice heavy with regret. Their words were validating, but they also reopened wounds I thought were healing. It wasn't just about being right. It was about how much I had lost before the truth finally came out. Through it all, I couldn't stop picturing my mom. Was she sitting alone in the living room, staring at the walls we once decorated together? Was she questioning every decision she had made, replaying the lies she believed, the daughter she pushed away? I wanted to hate her for what she had done, but I couldn't. Underneath the anger, the betrayal and the distance, she was still my mother. And no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, I still wanted her to be okay. But here's the cruel twist. Even as her marriage was falling apart, she still didn't reach out to me. Days turned into weeks, and though I heard about her heartbreak through others, she never picked up the phone to call me. That silence was almost worse than the night she kicked me out. Because now, she had every reason to believe me, every reason to see the truth, and still, she stayed away. It left me wondering whether our bond had been permanently broken, or if she was simply too ashamed to face me. And in that uncertainty, I found myself standing at a crossroads. I could either wait for her to come to me, clinging to the hope that she'd admit her mistake, or I could take the first step, risk reopening the wound, and face her directly. The decision gnawed at me day and night, because no matter which path I chose, one thing was certain. The story between us wasn't finished yet, and the next chapter would demand more from me than I ever imagined. I spent days debating whether to reach out. My pride screamed at me to stay silent, to let her sit in the emptiness she had chosen when she cast me aside. But my heart, it was louder. No matter how much I tried to bury it, the truth remained. I missed my mom. And now, knowing she was living through her own heartbreak, I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest. Eventually, I picked up the phone, stared at her contact for what felt like hours, and pressed call. My hands shook as it rang, and when she finally answered with a quiet, broken, "Hello?" my voice nearly failed me. The silence between us on that call was heavy, filled with all the words we hadn't said for weeks. I finally whispered, "Mom, it's me." There was a sharp inhale on the other end, and then a sob she tried to stifle. "Emma," she said, her voice trembling. It was the first time I'd heard her sound vulnerable in so long. I asked if I could come over, and though she hesitated, she finally agreed. Hanging up, I felt a mixture of fear and relief. This was the moment I had been both dreading and longing for. When I pulled up to the house, my chest tightened. The place that had once been my safe haven now felt like foreign territory. Walking up the steps, I half expected the door to slam in my face again. But when it opened, there she was. My mom, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, two broken people staring at each other, both unsure how to bridge the chasm that had formed between us. Finally, she stepped aside and said softly, "Come in." The inside of the house felt different too. The air was heavy, like it carried the weight of every argument, every betrayal. Mark's presence lingered in small ways, his shoes by the door, a jacket thrown over the couch, but he wasn't there. My mom led me to the kitchen, the same place where so many of our battles had taken place, and we sat across from each other. For a long time, all I could do was study her face. She looked older, wearier, like the lies had aged her years in just weeks. Finally, she whispered, "I was wrong, Emma. I should have believed you." The words hit me like a wave. I had replayed that moment in my head countless times, imagining her apology, craving it. But now that it was real, it didn't heal me instantly the way I thought it would. Instead, it opened up a flood of emotions I had kept bottled inside. "Do you have any idea what you did to me?" I said, my voice breaking. Tears blurred my vision as I told her about sleeping in my car, about the nights I cried myself to sleep, about how abandoned I had felt. She sobbed as I spoke, covering her face with her hands, whispering, "I'm so sorry," over and over again. It wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was something. For the first time, she wasn't defensive, she wasn't dismissive, she was raw and broken, just like me. She admitted that Mark had fed her lies, that he had twisted everything until she didn't know what to believe. "I wanted so badly for that marriage to work," she confessed. "I thought if I held on to him, I wouldn't be alone again. And in the process, I pushed away the one person who truly loved me." Her honesty cut deep, but it also cracked open a space where healing could begin. We sat there for hours, unraveling the knots of the past weeks. She told me about the fights with Mark, about how she had discovered messages on his phone that left no room for excuses. She told me how humiliated she felt, how betrayed, how foolish. I listened, torn between anger and compassion. Part of me wanted to scream, "Now you know how it feels." But another part wanted to reach across the table and hold her, to remind her that she wasn't alone. Because despite everything, she was still my mom, and I still loved her. At one point, she looked at me with tear-filled eyes and said, "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I sat there quietly, turning her words over in my mind. She wasn't wrong. I didn't owe her forgiveness. And yet, staring at the woman who had raised me, who had once been my best friend, I realized forgiveness wasn't about deserving. It was about whether I was willing to let the bitterness consume me or choose to rebuild something fragile but real. "Maybe not," I said softly. "But I don't want to hate you, Mom. I just want my mom back." Her sobs grew louder then, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she reached for my hand. The touch was tentative, almost afraid, but I didn't pull away. Our hands stayed clasped across the table, a fragile bridge over the wreckage of what we had lost. It wasn't a full reconciliation, not yet. Too much damage had been done, too many wounds left raw, but it was a start. And as the afternoon sun poured through the window, casting light over the kitchen where so much darkness had lived, I felt something shift inside me, a flicker of hope, small but undeniable. Still, even as I sat there with her, part of me couldn't shake the question lingering in the back of my mind. Could trust ever truly be rebuilt after it had been shattered so completely? Or were we only pretending, clinging to the memory of who we once were, while knowing deep down that things could never fully return to the way they had been? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning of a much longer journey, one that would test both of us in ways we had never imagined. The days after our conversation felt strange, almost like stepping into a world that was both familiar and foreign at the same time. My mom and I began speaking again, cautiously at first, as if every word carried the risk of reopening old wounds. There were long pauses on the phone, moments where we both wanted to say more, but didn't know how. Still, it was something. After weeks of silence, the sound of her voice, even cracked and uncertain, felt like a lifeline. I told myself this was a step toward healing, though deep down I knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. One weekend, she invited me back to the house for dinner. Walking through the door was overwhelming. The furniture, the photos on the walls, the smell of her cooking, it all felt the same. Yet I was different. I wasn't the girl who once believed this house was unshakable. I had been broken here, betrayed here, and part of me feared the memories would suffocate me. But as we sat down to eat, something softened in me. She kept asking if I was comfortable, if I wanted more food, fussing over me in the way she used to when I was a child. It was awkward, yes, but also strangely comforting. As we ate, she began opening up in ways she never had before. She admitted how lonely she had been before marrying Mark, how desperate she was to hold on to someone, even when deep down she sensed he wasn't who he pretended to be. "I think I ignored the warning signs because I didn't want to start over again," she confessed. Hearing her speak so honestly made me realize that her choices, as painful as they were for me, came from her own fears. It didn't excuse what she had done, but it helped me see her not just as my mother, but as a flawed woman trying to survive. There were moments when anger still flared inside me. As she spoke, I sometimes wanted to shout, "But what about me? What about the daughter you threw away?" Yet when I looked at her, tired, remorseful, broken, I swallowed those words. I had lived with that anger long enough, and it hadn't healed me. Holding on to it would only poison what little chance we had left to rebuild. Instead, I told her how deeply she had hurt me, how abandoned I had felt. She listened this time, really listened, with tears streaming down her face. That was new. That was progress. In the weeks that followed, we began creating new rituals together. Sometimes it was as simple as meeting for coffee at a local cafe, sitting across from each other and sharing stories from our day. Other times, it was watching an old movie we used to love, letting the nostalgia bridge the gaps between us. These moments didn't erase the past, but they reminded me of the bond we once had, and how maybe, just maybe, it could be reborn. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight, but with each small step, I felt the tiniest cracks in my heart begin to mend. Of course, there were setbacks too. There were days when she called and I didn't answer, days when I felt the old bitterness rising, whispering that forgiveness was a mistake. There were times when I saw a shadow of doubt in her eyes, as if she was still questioning whether she truly deserved my presence in her life. But instead of letting those moments break us again, we began to acknowledge them. We talked about the pain openly, instead of burying it. And slowly, that honesty became the foundation of something new, something fragile but real. One night, as we sat on the porch drinking tea, she said something I'll never forget. "Emma, I know I can't erase what I did. I can't undo the nights you spent alone or the tears you cried because of me. But if you let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I will never choose someone else's lies over you again." Her words made me cry, not because they fixed everything, but because they showed me she finally understood. For the first time, I saw not just regret in her eyes, but determination. I realized then that forgiveness isn't about pretending the past never happened. It's about choosing to move forward despite the scars. My mom and I would never go back to the way things were before Mark, because innocence once lost can't be restored. But maybe what we could build now was something stronger, something born from pain, honesty, and the hard lessons we both had to learn. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be real. And maybe that was enough. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel lighter. The bitterness that once weighed me down loosened its grip, replaced by a fragile but growing hope. My mom and I were still healing, still learning, still stumbling, but we were doing it together. And though the scars of betrayal would always remain, they became a reminder of how far we had come, not just as mother and daughter, but as two women who had survived lies, heartbreak, and loss, and still found their way back to each other. Looking back now, I see that the night she kicked me out wasn't the end of us. It was the breaking point that forced us to face truths we had been avoiding for too long. Painful, yes. Devastating, absolutely. But also transformative. Because without that night, we might never have confronted the cracks beneath the surface. We might never have rebuilt something stronger, something grounded in truth. And though our story is far from over, I know one thing for certain. We are no longer standing on opposite sides of the storm. We are weathering it together. When I look back on everything that happened, it still feels surreal. There are moments that play in my mind like broken film reels. The night my mom told me to leave, the weight of those trash bags in my arms, the sting of realizing she believed someone else's lies over my truth. For a long time, I thought that moment defined me. I thought I would forever be the daughter who wasn't enough, the one who was discarded. But standing here today, I realize that moment wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning of who I was meant to become. I learned that love, even the kind that feels unconditional, can be fragile when poisoned by deception. I learned that trust, once broken, takes more than apologies to rebuild. It takes time, consistency, and the willingness to sit in the discomfort of past wounds. And most importantly, I learned that forgiveness isn't a gift you give because someone deserves it. It's a choice you make for your own peace, a decision to release the anger that could otherwise consume you. My mom didn't deserve easy forgiveness, but I chose to try anyway. Not because I wanted to erase the pain, but because I didn't want to let it define me forever. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, you know the ache I'm talking about. It's a wound that feels impossible to heal. But here's what I want you to remember. Pain can be a teacher. It can strip away illusions, yes, but it can also reveal truths about strength, resilience, and the kind of love that endures even after being tested. My mom and I are proof of that. We're not perfect, and we never will be. But we're still here, still trying, still choosing each other. And that's enough. So if you're sitting in your own storm right now, wondering if you'll ever make it through, hear me. You will. It won't look the way you imagined. It won't be neat or easy or painless. But survival is possible, healing is possible, and sometimes the very thing that feels like it's breaking you is what shapes you into someone stronger, braver, and more compassionate than you ever thought you could be. Sharing this story hasn't been easy. It's raw, it's vulnerable, and it exposes parts of me I once wanted to hide, but I chose to tell it because I know someone out there needs to hear it. Maybe that someone is you. Maybe you've been doubting yourself, carrying the weight of someone else's choices, wondering if you're worth loving. Let me say this clearly. You are. You always were. And no one's lies, no matter how convincing, can take away your truth. Before I close, I want to thank you for walking with me through this journey. Telling it has been painful, but also healing, because it reminds me that our stories matter. They connect us, they remind us we're not alone, and they help us find light even in the darkest moments. If my story touched you, if it made you feel seen, or if it gave you even a spark of hope, then I ask you to stay connected with me. Hit that subscribe button, join this community, and let's keep sharing these stories together. Because sometimes the simple act of listening and being heard can change everything. This isn't just my story, it's ours. And together, we can turn pain into something powerful. So don't leave just yet. Subscribe, stay with me, and let's see where this journey takes us next.